Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. My name is David. I'm facilitating this morning. I want to welcome René Rivera. René has been a student of the Dharma since 2004, and since 2008 has been a member of the East Bay Meditation Center's Alphabet Sangha, for which he's also a community teacher. René has participated in East Bay Meditation Center's commitment to Dharma programs, as well as Spirit Rock's commitment to Dharma, community Dharma Leaders Program. And he's a community teacher at the East Bay Meditation Center in Oakland, as well as leads teachings at Spirit Rock, the San Francisco Dharma Collective, and many other groups around the Bay Area. And he often does a focus on offering teachings for queer and trans people of color. So thank you so much, René, for joining us, and welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you all for inviting me into this space. So today I want to share around my own practice of cultivating belonging and using practice for repairing attachment wounding. So a lot of the focus of what I'll be sharing today is what I have learned around attachment trauma and repair, and particularly how the practices that I have found to work on healing those wounds, the wounds that we get in our early relationships that can make it hard to experience belonging and make it difficult to be in relationships that feel secure. So, so I'll be sharing from a number of different sources and teachers that I have learned from. I actually want to start with a teacher who someone who I've known about for a while, but just has recently come out with a new book. Sebene Selassie just published in the past year this book called You Belong. Really beautiful book. And one of the things that she points out that we all share this longing to belong. And in fact, the word belong itself is made up of two words. If we say belonging is made up of two words, be longing. So she's really pointing to the way that actually our longing to belong is a crucial ingredient in our cultivating belonging. So I'm just going to read a little piece from the introduction of this book. She says, to be longing requires opening to all the ways we feel we don't belong. All of us are taught to not belong. We feel we don't belong, and presto, our survival instinct triggers our longing to belong. This profound longing may be the only thing that can save us from extinction. So I just really love the way that she is centering. She's really pointing to the way that all of us have this experience of not belonging, regardless of the various dimensions of our not belonging. She's speaking as a Black immigrant, woman from Ethiopia with a life experience that just has left her not having places, where she felt she belonged. I have an experience of growing up in a multiracial family, growing up as a kid who has always known that I'm queer and different, growing up as a trans kid. There are just so many places of feeling in between, not belonging. Even when I came out, as queer, growing up in the Bay Area with so much queer community around me, I still felt I didn't belong. And in some ways, my transness was something that always made me feel outside, even of this incredibly beautiful, welcoming community like the queer community in the Bay Area, which I'm so lucky to have been, to have grown up in. So yeah, just like pointing to all of the ways that we feel we don't belong, and then that incredible wholesome longing to belong, that can be the place to start from over and over again in cultivating our sense of belonging. This feels like a really timely topic right now, just as many of us, myself included, are starting to kind of reemerge into the world, and in particular into the world of relationships. So, I am now fully vaccinated. Just in the last few weeks, I've, once I got my, my 2 shots and had my 2 weeks after the second shot, it's only been a few weeks of being able to hug people and being able to be out with my friends without a mask, and starting to move into what kinds of connection do I want right now? What ways do I want to connect with people? What kinds of touch do I want now that I can have touch again? There's just it feels like this incredible reemergence, but also this moment of really being discerning around how I am in relationships. So I'm grateful that I've spent a lot of this past year plus when I haven't had that kind of connection, and particularly physical connection, to really reflect on my relationship to myself, what I really I'm trying to cultivate in relationships. So this talk is kind of the fruits of a lot of that contemplation for myself, as well as a number of years of research, reading specifically around attachment theory, and learning how we can become traumatized in our the relationships that we had with our early caregivers, in terms of how we attached to them, and then how that shows up in us in adulthood, and then how can we repair that. And there's a ton of literature out there. A lot of it has been challenging for me to navigate because I find it often to be quite pathologizing. There's a lot, you get to learn your attachment style. So I learned through this reading that my kind of core conditioning is what's called fearful avoidant, which is the worst attachment style. And, with some leaning towards the avoidant, another bad attachment style. And there's a lot that's just just avoid these people with these bad attachment styles, rather than looking at these as just different ways that we relate, and that we are so plastic, in our conditioning, and that these are all this is all different kinds of conditioning that we can actually work with through our practice. So, a book that I found recently, just in the last few months, that's been enormously helpful, is going to be kind of like my guide as we're going through this today. So I just want to share this one. This is called Polysecure. The author is Jessica Fern. And so the subtitle here is Attachment, Trauma, and Consensual Non-Monogamy. So it's interesting. I've found this book through different kind of polyamorous and sex-positive communities that I'm a part of. It's interesting that a book really directed towards people who are in non-monogamous relationships actually turns out to be the best book by far that I have read around attachment repair. And I've read a lot of books on this topic. So I've been kind of preaching the gospel of this book, and also find it to be really useful whether you're in non-monogamous relationships or not. And I want to take a little digression here to actually speak about how we hold monogamy and non-monogamy in Buddhist spaces specifically. So, I have found over the years, particularly in different spaces where we're taking the precepts and particularly talking about the third precept of not engaging in sexual misconduct, that sometimes sexual misconduct is equated with non-monogamy. And also I'll just read a little piece from the Plum Village precepts, which are Thich Nhat Hanh's community, a community that I hold very dear, have so much respect for. But when I hear this language that I'm going to read to you, it's challenging for me. So these precepts, this is just a piece of the precept. It says, knowing that sexual desire is not love and that sexual activity motivated by craving always harms myself as well as others, I am determined not to engage in sexual relationships without true love and a deep, long-term commitment made known to my family and friends. So they don't actually use the word monogamy in that, but it feels very implied that we're in a singular love relationship, love and sexual relationship that is a long-term commitment, that is the one that is a very public relationship. And there's an implication that it's singular in here. I mean, maybe they're encompassing other things, but this felt that way to me. And so I just, even in really learning more through this book, I was really thinking about this piece of how do we hold this in our Buddhist communities? One thing that's been very powerful for me is learning more from Lama Rod Owens. And he's really the first Buddhist teacher I have heard who is out as non-monogamous. And it's been very powerful for me and given me a sense of permission to occupy that space as well. And just to be able to bring something like this into a talk feels it still feels a little edgy to me. And also it feels important to unpack this a little bit and say that non-monogamy is not, I believe, equated with sexual misconduct, and monogamy is not automatically ethical. It really is all how do we practice in all of our relationships? How are we bringing our values and living our values in all of our relationships? How are we holding ourselves accountable? For me as a teacher, what is crucial is how am I holding myself accountable for my choices, my actions, my relationships, how I show up in all my relationships. And also that I have people in my life who hold me accountable, like my mentor, and any choices I make are things that I talk about, any choices around dating in any, Buddhist communities or something I talk about with my mentor, that I talk about with my peers. How we hold our ethics and how we are accountable for me doesn't equate to any particular way of being in relationship. So I just felt like it's something important to say that I feel like doesn't get said. So I just wanted to say that here. And I was reading an article recently that said that, it just was talking about kind of general trends around non-monogamy, and that gay men in general, about 65% of relationships are non-monogamous, as opposed to heterosexual relationships where I think it's more like 20 to 25% are non-monogamous. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but that's a great place to start. And then it also felt important, to say to a community like this, mostly made up of gay men or queer men, and including trans and non-binary folks, so that, because I feel like our experience in our communities, for myself in queer communities and trans communities, our experience and the ways that we are in relationships don't feel it's reflected in something like the Plum Village precepts that I just read. So I feel like it's important to hold some space for the way that we are in relationships. And for myself, just to say, like, I was raised in the 70s in the free love movement, and my parents were also non-monogamous, and I saw a lot of harm done, a great deal of harm in that, particularly in terms of men controlling women's bodies. And so for a long time, I did equate non-monogamy with harm. And so it took me a long time to come to really understand that actually those two things are not equated. It is how we are in relationship that is important and how we are accountable. So just a little digression on that. And I think there's also so much to learn with all of the thinking that's happening right now around non-monogamy, and there's many different forms that are being created, and I've really resonated a lot with what's called relationship anarchy, that really looks at, like, how do we prioritize romantic relationships versus friend relationships, and then also, like, what's, like, my relationship with the earth, what's my relationship with myself, and to say that all of these are important relationships as a counter to the way in this culture sometimes the dyadic romantic relationship really gets lifted up as the important thing that we're supposed to be doing or be in. So there's a lot of really helpful thinking happening in that space that I think connects with practice in some ways. So just getting back to attachment, maybe there needs to be a whole nother talk around Buddhism and polyamory. But to get back to the attachment piece, in the book Polysecure by Jessica Fern, she does just a great job of doing an overview of attachment, how it works, how we get our adult attachment styles. And it can be helpful to sort of start with what does this look like in children, as sort of a grounding of understanding of attachment. And so there's kind of, in a way, there's 4 different styles of attachment, and they break into on 2 different axes. So one axis, if we imagine an axis going vertically, it would be low anxiety and high anxiety. And then another axis would be moving into relationship and moving away from relationship. So those are kind of the two dimensions. And so someone who is has low anxiety and also moves towards relationships is what we would call securely attached. And that in childhood, that looks like the kid who you might see, we just imagine, like, we're going to have a little park scene here, mother sitting on the bench or father or parent, whatever. And a child's playing in the playground, and they will be really involved in their play. And then periodically they'll come and check in with the parent. Maybe they'll be like, oh, I want to show you this rock, or I'm just coming to give you a hug, or whatever. They'll do a little check-in, they'll go back to playing. But that would be a securely attached child. And then the child who we would call a anxiously attached child is the child who just won't leave their parent. They'll be, like, clinging. They'll, they might look around, but they're not going to go away from the parent to play. And that child often develops that behavior because either their parent is very anxious, their parent is unpredictable, like they're afraid that if they go away, their parent will disappear. So those are a few conditions that might result in that anxious behavior. And then we might have an avoidant. Sometimes the word avoidant is used, sometimes dismissive. child, and that child is just off playing, and actually they're not checking in. And that child often has experienced a lot of neglect. And so they have a little bit given up on their caregiver, and they're just doing their own thing, and they're not checking back in. But if you picked that child up and held them, you would feel that their heart was racing. Like they're still anxious on the inside, but they look very calm on the outside. And they look like they're just doing their own thing. They're independent. And then, so we call that an avoidant attachment style. And then the fourth is called fearful avoidant. And so that avoidant child has lower evident anxiety, but they have a high level of avoidance. And then the child that has both a high level of avoidance and a high level of anxiety is called fearful avoidant. And this is often a child where they've experienced possibly abuse from a caregiver, or they might have a caregiver who has the same attachment style, who's just very anxious. It could be different conditions, but this is the child that both wants to go towards the parent for care, but also is afraid and wants to get away. And so that can often result in just a sort of a collapse. It's described even sometimes you'll see a child just sort of drop to the ground, not able to, their body is in such conflict with itself that they can't function. So that child is not very functional. And then so then each of these four styles has an adult equivalent, and that secure person has relationships in their life where when they get distressed, they can go and really feel like they can settle into the support of another person. And it's not like they're merged with another person. It's I have this secure relationship. I go out and do what I want to do in the world. And when I hit an obstacle, I have someone to come and support me and get me back to what we would call a regulated state. So someone who I can actually regulate my nervous system with. And the anxious person is someone who is in a relationship where there is more of that merging. The anxious person wants to be with the other person all the time, feels very anxious when they're away. The avoidant person is also called dismissive and can be someone who values relationship a little bit less. They tend to be in relationships, but to be sometimes contemptuous or dismissive to their partner. And then the fearful avoidant people tend to have a very hard time being in relationships at all. And who have just a high level of anxiety and who tend to avoid relationships. So that's some of how the childhood piece turns into the adult piece. And in all of these, there's a lot of the literature is oh, you are this kind of person. So, I haven't found a lot in the psychological literature about, how do you repair this? How do you repair this wounding? And one of the things that Jessica Fern adds in that's really helpful for me is she talks about the sort of romantic relationship or the parent-child relationship being only one place where this attachment patterns show up. It can also show up in our relationship with ourself. It can show up with our relationship in community, in our relationships with institutions or systems. It can even show up in our relationship with the earth. So that's super helpful for me. As a kid, I had a very neglectful upbringing. And at the same time, I had incredible access to nature. And I lived in, off in the woods. And I spent most of my time with animals and in nature. And I actually, on reflection, see myself as having had a secure relationship with nature that actually got me through a lot of really difficult times in my childhood, and that persists to this day. And when I am having a hard time, I go to nature and my nervous system settles right down. Just as a person, I might go to a partner. nature is really the place where I go for that kind of settling. And so Jessica she talks about this nested model of attachment trauma and how each of sort of like these concentric circles of self, dyadic or familial relationships, community relationships, institutional relationships, relationship with the world. All of these are areas where we might actually have different attachment patterns, where we might have different levels of trauma, we might have different levels of functioning, and capacities. So it's been very helpful because it's something that's just not addressed in other literature. Everything is very focused on the family relationship in childhood and then the dyadic romantic relationship in adulthood. And we have so many more relationships than that and so many other levels of functioning. And we might have secure functioning in one area, anxious functioning in another area, and so on. And that can even be true in different relationships that we're in. I wanted to bring in a meditation teacher who's done a lot of work in this area, which is George Haas. I don't know if folks are familiar with him. That's Haas. And he has kind of a group is called a Meta Group and offers a lot of classes and retreats around attachment repair. He's really, I think, the best known in the meditation world around this topic of attachment repair. And I've done a number of his classes, found it to be super helpful. And he sort of talks about three things that are needed for attachment repair. One is, I just want to say also that his work is really based on a researcher named Daniel P. Brown. I have the giant book right here, Attachment Disturbance in Adults. And this is very much a clinical type of research book. But George Haas has taken that and really blended it with practices from the Insight tradition and created a roadmap for attachment repair, which I personally have found incredibly beneficial. And so he talks about three elements for attachment repair. So the first one is actually valuing attachment. Really, and this kind of gets back to the piece that Sebene, from the quote from the beginning from Sebene. How are we really feeling our longing to belong in relationship? Are we really valuing what we can get in our relationships? And so one of the things he talks a lot about is the way that secure relationships are actually the foundation for exploration. If we don't have secure relationships, actually our exploration in the world is curtailed. So, when we talked about that anxious person, because it's so hard for that person to step away from the relationship, their exploration in the world is curtailed. And then in the case of the avoidant person tends to be very focused on status and on looking good in the world. And so actually their exploration is curtailed because they're making choices around status or looking good rather than making choices based on the real exploration of their hearts, real sense of purpose. And part of that is because in both cases, there's not a place to go go out and explore, and you might make some mistakes. You might get lost. You might get scared. And when you have that secure relationship, you have this home base to come back to and settle your nervous system, and then you're ready to go out and explore again. So George Haas talks a lot about this piece about, really understanding why do we need secure relationships? It's actually for our exploration. It's actually so that we can be who we want to be in the world. And that creates motivation around all the work it's going to take to cultivate these secure relationships. And then the second piece that he talks about is something he calls mentalizing. And it's like understanding actually how we came to be the way that we are, how we work in the world. And he uses practices really directly from the insight tradition, particularly what we call noting practice, just the practice of often the way that he guides it is around emotions. Do I really know what emotions I'm feeling moment to moment? So he is suggesting kind of daily life meditation that is really focused on noting what emotions we're feeling as they arise. And that helps us construct a sense of who we are in the world, what we're feeling. And it helps with attachment repair because sometimes in the different insecure styles, we might actually not feel our own feelings, or we might only feel the other person's feelings. So really knowing our own feelings is crucial to attachment repair. And then also he talks a lot about just understanding our own story and creating what he calls a coherent narrative that includes our attachment trauma and understanding of just where our patterns and behaviors come from. And so these practices are really very grounded in the insight tradition. And then the third piece is something from the book that I was just mentioned, and it's a practice called Ideal Parent Protocol. And you actually do a meditation, guided meditation, where you imagine your ideal secure parents and your relationship, the secure relationship between you and your parents. So these are imaginary parents, not your real parents. I mean, if you have a secure relationship with your parents, then this wouldn't apply. This is really for folks who have attachment trauma. And you repopulate your own mind with these imagined secure behaviors and secure care that you're receiving from your imaginary caregivers, which then allows you to recognize good care when you're out in the world and getting into relationships. So this is like very, he's actually like using meditation to repopulate the database of our experiences. And I've found that to be actually quite surprisingly effective. So that's George Hassan. I really like, I think he's doing really great work. And at the same time, in going through like particularly what I'm learning from Jessica Fern from this book, Polysecure, I feel like it's limited because it is so focused on the dyadic romantic relationship. And we have so many more relationships in our lives. And she really points to like, what about our relationships with our siblings, our relationships with our friends, our relationships with, other important people in our lives. These are all places where we can be working on secure attachment. And so just expanding the universe of attachment relationships feels really important. And then the other thing that she offers is a great acronym. I suspect she's probably a Buddhist practitioner because we know we all love our acronyms. So she offers like a roadmap to attachment repair, and she called it HEART. So with this, these are like the crucial ingredients of secure relating, so to speak. So the H in hearts is here. So are we present and connected in our relationships? And the E is expressed delight. And George also talks about this. He talks about delight being the currency of secure relationships. And so are we expressing delight in our relationships? That's the crucial piece. The A is for attunement, being really attuned to our own experience and the experience of the other person. The R is rituals and routines. So how are we celebrating with each other? How are we marking important milestones? How are we marking the times when we're deepening relationship? So really establishing routines in our relationships. The T is turning towards after conflict. So how do we do conflict, and do we keep coming towards each other in those moments of conflict and after those moments of conflict? And then the S is for our relationship with ourself. And so she really makes the point that without a secure relationship with ourselves, it is hard to be in a secure relationship with another. So we must cultivate all of these same elements with ourselves. And that's challenging. That actually, like, as I was working with that, one that is challenging for me is delight. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to express delight in myself. That sounds really hard, but I've been working on it. So just taking all of these same elements and making sure we're cultivating them with ourselves, because it's not an either or. It's not just I need a secure relationship with myself in order to have a good relationship. I also need the relationship itself to help me heal. So it's like what I have learned, and also what I'm reading in this book by Jessica Fern, is to be working in both levels at the same time. Doing the repair in my relationship, like the relationship between my inner kid and inner parent, and to be doing the repair in relationships with my important people, partners, friends, family members. So I just found this heart practice from Jessica Fern to be enormously helpful. Wanted to share it with all of you. And just also really inviting this idea of expanding beyond just dyadic relationships and family relationships, even expanding beyond human relationships to our relationship with the earth has been really important to me. And one of my regular practices through this pandemic has been 7 homecomings practice that Lama Rod Owens leads, and it's an expanded version of the refuges. So besides just Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, it also brings in our relationship with the earth, our relationship with ancestors, our relationship with ourselves, and with what he called silence, which I also think of as space or spaciousness. And through cultivating these, sort of taking these 7 refuges on a daily or even more than daily basis, it has been part of my work of attachment repair in all of those dimensions, which is kind of like Jessica Fern's, what she calls her nested model of attachment trauma. Knowing I'm doing the repair work in all of these dimensions, and this practice, this benefactor practice of the 7 homecomings has really been a way to bring that into my daily life, into my daily practice. So that is what I wanted to share with you all, some fruits of my own exploration and pandemic exploration. So I just wanted to open up and see if there's any questions.
Hi, Renee. Thank you. Boy, your talk really resonated with me, especially one of the things that first resonated was I am reemerging into the world as a different person after this past year. And the idea of really kind of reexamining what kind of relationships, I could really relate to that. I feel like, I've been in a cocoon for a year and some changes have happened in the interim. The other thing is that I was talking to someone the other day about how sexuality is not often addressed in Buddhist retreats and workshops, and so much that I almost felt the idea of sexual misconduct made it stimulated. I have a hard time putting this into words, but my own kind of ambivalent feelings about my own sexuality somehow got kind of, I'm wondering am I engaged in sexual misconduct because it's not monogamous, because it's not in a love relationship? So I don't know if has there ever been workshops that actually address sexuality that you've attended or that you know about? And I guess I'll just leave it with that.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. This is an area for myself that I felt is really missing in my own Dharma exploration, is this exploration of sexuality. And I think I feel like there's just as maybe use this Jungian word, there's a lot of shadow in the Buddhist world around sexuality in different ways in different places. And I've mostly practiced in the insight tradition. I feel like the shadow in the insight tradition is that we just pretend it doesn't exist, which feels not helpful. I feel like Lama Rod Owens is really someone who I've looked to as a teacher who talks very openly around his own sexuality. It's been very healing for me. Locally, Daigon Gaither, if you're familiar with him, he's a Zen teacher, and he speaks also a lot on sexuality. And I did a day long at East Bay Meditation Center with the two of them, actually, Lama Rod and Daigon, around, it was a day for men and masculine folks, and it was focused on sexuality, and it was very, very good. But that's very rare that I've come across that. So if other people know of things, I would love to hear of them also. I'm with you. I've really been looking for that. Yeah. Thanks, Matthew. Cass.
Thank you for a really fascinating talk. This is really great, and it's the kind of talk that really makes me value GBF and getting to hear shares of this kind. So I guess for me, the question is how do you discern between being a good Buddhist and being non-attached and being actually avoidant, relationship avoidant? Because that's, it's sort of, I vacillate, it's oh, this is great. Oh, this is horrible. So I'm just curious about if you have any thoughts on that.
So many thoughts. I sometimes think all of our retreats are just full of avoidant people. I think avoidant folks are particularly drawn to Buddhism. It makes a virtue of avoidance. And I feel like I come also as having a lot of avoidant conditioning for myself. It makes concentration practice actually quite easy. And so there can also be just this ease of going into these very pleasant and blissful, unattached places that are actually just my conditioning as someone who's fairly avoidant. So it's really interesting. I had a great conversation once with someone who spent decades in monastery, who spoke about how these attachment patterns play out in the monasteries, and that was also super interesting. And looking at some of the avoidance in monastic practice. So there's a whole book to be written here on this topic. So thank you for bringing it up. Yeah. Jason.
Thank you. So thanks for the talk. So I have a response in regards to the first statement in that Plum Village, right? So sexual desire is not love. That statement I find to be interesting in regards to Alan Watts has a whole lecture on his idea of what's called the spectrum of love. And that kind of where we begin with love is all on the spectrum. So sexual desire can be a place to begin, can be a part of the spectrum of what love, the different colors of what love can be. So I wanted to acknowledge that, but I also wanted to acknowledge that within sex and love, so in English, we only have the word love, whereas in Greek, they had many different words for the term love or what love could be. But when we talk about love or sex, right, we start getting into an energy that starts to overwhelm, or that has that potential to overwhelm because it's so powerful, right? And there's both that draw to want to experience that power, right? But then there's also the fear of what is that overwhelm. And I feel like Buddhism decides to take the road of we're going to shut it down. And that's what a lot of religions do, of okay, we're going to shut that stuff down. But then that stuff gets played out in shadow, right? It comes out in different ways that monks or different religious people, right, play out their their acts. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge of like, I love Buddhism on many levels, but there's aspects that sometimes I have to like say, you know what, that doesn't really work for me. And, from my experience in life, I actually find that there's ways to engage with this. And yes, I can use the Buddhist precepts to help me create some guidelines and boundaries. But also part of living for me is about taking the boundaries off at times and taking the top off and going for a wild ride, not always staying on my mat, because that's not where life happens either. But I also finally wanted to just acknowledge that your idea of delight, I wanted to just throw out there that Barbara Dilley, who is a professor or teacher at Naropa University, if anyone did my workshop at Vajrapani, she had the whole 5 eye practices. But she has a whole idea called kinesthetic delight and cultivating your kinesthetic delight. So as an offering to you, I would say that to become more delighted in yourself, explore your kinesphere, explore your kinetics. Okay.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. And I also just wanted to point to, just like Sebene was saying in the quote at the beginning about being longing as a way to move into belonging. Also, there is this impulse in desire, sexual desire, that is moving toward oneness, that is moving toward a very sacred experience of bliss. Like, actually, I was just reading this piece in Lama Rod's Love and Rage, where he talks about like sex, what we might call sex addiction, is like one chasing the experience of bliss and oneness and orgasm. And can we also acknowledge that very wholesome impulse towards the sacred? And I think Rumi talks about this over and over and over again, is the way that the desire takes us to the sacred. Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I want to check. I know we're getting to time, David, and announcements. So I just want to check in. I know there's also a bunch still.
Yeah, thank you for checking in. I think we could take one more.
I can also stay after if more questions. Why don't we do that?
Okay, that's great. I was going to mention to the group also, we do leave the room open for a while for people to stay connected, so we can also do that as well. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, René. Thank you so much for your talk, and these ideas obviously are topical, and it's wonderful to have a Dharma teacher touch on things that are so like on the surface of our tangible experiences, but we don't get an opportunity to really engage with, maybe not in the intersection of our practice, especially. So I appreciate you bringing that personally. So thank you all for joining us today. We are going to making some announcements. Jerry, thank you for posting that next week, Bill Weber will be our speaker. I also want to share that every Wednesday, GBF has a sitting group. It's a 30-minute sit followed by an open discussion at 7:30 every Wednesday. That everybody's welcome to attend. It's peer facilitated, and details on the same link is at gaybuddhist.org. And also, I saw earlier that Richard had posted that there is going to be a fall retreat on November 12th and the 14th. So thank you, Richard, for sharing that. And so everyone keep your eyes on that. The Pali word for generosity is dana. And one of the ways that we're able to sustain Gay Buddhist Fellowship and the supporting of our teachers is by our community members offering dana each week. And so we do want to encourage you, everyone who's here today, to make a contribution in a way that's meaningful for you all. And I can post the link. You can go to gaybuddhist.org or just follow the PayPal link here. Dana supports the continuation of our work. We've continued through the pandemic to support the San Francisco Buddhist Center, our geographical home, with their expenses a little bit, and looking forward to returning, and also to support our teachers. Are there any other announcements that people might have that I may have forgotten?
I'm wondering, Jeff or David, do we know when we are going to return to the San Francisco Buddhist Center?
We're going to talk about that at our next board meeting.
Okay.
Yeah. The Buddhist Center is out at the director's out of town right now. So I'm waiting to get in touch with her and see where they are with the development of Zoom equipment.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to pass it back over to René. René, if you still would like, if you could close us out with a dedication of merit. Thank you.
Thank you. So just taking a moment to take a few breaths together. Recognizing the goodness and the merit created by our coming together today to practice the goodness and merit of our inquiry, deepening in our path of healing. May all of this goodness be gathered up and offered to the world. May we offer this goodness in particular to those who have experienced loss, those who have recently transitioned to the spirit world or are transitioning right now, to those who have lost loved ones, to those who are experiencing illness, also to those who have experienced loss of freedom through detention or incarceration. May all who are suffering find their suffering eased. May they find joy, contentment, happiness. May they be in good health in body, mind, and spirit. May they receive all the care that they need. May they be held in love, kindness, compassion. May all beings everywhere be free.
Thanks, René. Thanks, David.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, René.
Thank you all for having me, and we'll hang out for like another 10 minutes if folks have questions.
Thank you for a great talk, René. I'm so glad somebody's finally talking about attachment on a human level and a personality level, because we're so eager to transcend to just do our Buddhist thing. But I lost track of all the different styles you were talking about in Jennifer's book, and there was a dismissive style. What was that?
Yeah, so it's called either avoidant or dismissive. Okay. Both terms are used in the psychological literature. And that style is, and then Cass made this great point about how sometimes those of us attracted to meditation might have this attachment style. So it's characterized in childhood by often an experience of neglect, but it's also a part of that is actually the idealization of the parents. So sometimes there'll be an experience of neglect, but the person might not be aware of it. And they just say, oh, I had great parents. But then if you start to ask, well, what was your childhood actually like? They might not remember, or you might have just sort of like erased in their own experience that some of the experiences of neglect. And then in adulthood, it looks like actually not being very aware of inner experience. So the dismissive or avoidant person has less access to emotion. And this is kind of like the opposite of the anxiously attached adult who is very aware of avoidant and actually is quite aware of emotions in others. So sometimes avoidant and anxious people pair up. It's a very common pairing in relationships. And then the anxious person does all the emoting for both parties. It's sort of like one person in the relationship is in charge of emotions and then tells the avoidant person what they're feeling because the avoidant person may not be aware. So that's a very interesting dynamic. So there can be a lack of awareness of inner experience and also a real dampening down of things like anxiety. So that can also be a place where I think I was mentioning like concentration practice actually is easier because there's already a damping down that's happening in internal experience.
So it's dismissive of one's own experience.
It can be dismissive of one's own experience as well as dismissive of others.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Renee, can you share the title of the clinical book that you said a lot of George Haas's work comes from? There's a person here who's been asking.
It's Attachment Disturbance in Adults by Daniel P. Brown.
Renee, in all these books you're reading, and does all of this talk about how a child's brain is also very different than an adult's brain in terms of how they're perceiving or taking in and trying to navigate these emotions, right? Because when we are looking at it from an adult's brain back to that child that we were, it's a very different understanding.
All of this is more focused on nervous system functioning than it is on brain functioning. So the focus is on nervous system regulation. Is how do we learn to regulate our own nervous systems as children, and then how do we then regulate as adults? So there's kind of there's co-regulation. So in a secure relationship, we're actually co-regulating with another human, another body. The child is learning to regulate their own nervous system through the adult's nervous system.
How do they separate nervous system from cognitive? I mean, perception is part of nervous system response too.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I think just to get to this regulation piece, there's this co-regulation with another in a secure relationship. There's auto-regulation, which is what the dismissive or avoidant person does, where they actually are able to regulate their own nervous systems, but might use external things like drugs or alcohol, like sex, consuming media. There's all these ways of externally regulating our nervous systems. And then the anxious person is like dependent on another nervous system to regulate themselves. They can't actually go off and do it and do it without always being in contact with another nervous system. So anyway, it's very focused on nervous system functioning. And yes, the cognitive piece is all there too. But a lot of this literature is less focused on cognitive and more focused on nervous system. Tom.
Thank you very much. Your talk really, and you didn't have a teleprompter, did you? I mean, you just, I got so much information coming. He's got to be reading this.
I do. I'll just behind the scenes, I have a document on my computer that I'm looking at, but I'm not reading from it. It's just a bunch of notes.
Well, it was very well. It was like delivered right from the heart. You didn't seem to be checking it with your brain. Anyway, what I wanted to say, and there was so much material. Jeff mentioned an author named Jennifer's first name. Was that Jennifer or Jessica? Jeff, were you talking about?
Jessica Fern.
Yeah, I got that one. But
that's the same one.
Okay.
I got it wrong.
That's okay. I just wanted to confer that, not dump some shame on you. Although that's kind of fun sometimes. No, I'm going up to my youngest brother. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. He's the youngest. And he lost his wife this past April to breast cancer. It was kind of a 5-year battle, but it sort of pulled the rug out from under him. And he's requested that I come up there and spend the summer with him on a kind of remote location in Washington State in the islands. And so your talk has kind of opened up all kinds of questions for me about how to take care of him, basically. And so but he's never really reached out before because he and his wife were together for like 40 years of their adult life, all of their adult life, basically. And I've not had a monogamous relationship like that. I've been driven by attention variability challenges in regard, and it's affected relationships in a deep way. And so I'm wondering how I can, I'm just wondering what that's going to look like. And I guess I just have to go through it and listen, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's having a hard time being alone. And that's not my experience. I really get off on it, which is not always healthy either, but somewhat.
Right.
So,
yeah, this may give some perspective around his different ways of relating, ways that he is different than you. Yeah.
Well, anyway, thank you for that. I'm going to look at those books and see if, see what I can get.
Yeah.
That. It's exciting to be going out in the world again. I'm in Southeast Arizona, and my two housemates are gone on a road trip. And so I've been kind of really anxious to get out and about again and do some hugging.
Yeah. Yeah, I went. It's actually the first time I was meditating with other people. It's just about 10 people. Dear Dharma siblings. And then also getting the hugs. I was like giddy. It was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oxytocin is quite amazing.
I know. It's amazing. And also like that, also the nervous system piece, meditating with other people in actual space is so soothing. It was the first time in, 15 months of getting to meditate with other human bodies.
Yeah, just hearing other people's stomachs rumble and their breathing.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to go get to my next thing, but I just really appreciate being here with you all. And thank you so much for all of your engagement.
Great having you.
Thank you,
Renee. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
See
Renee.
you all soon, I hope.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great week.
Thanks, David. Bye-bye.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.